U.S. President Joe Biden is summoning congressional leaders to the White House next week to try and hash out the partisan dispute over the debt ceiling. Biden is calling all four of either party's leaders in the House and Senate to sit down for discussions. The move comes after the Treasury warned the government would be likely to default on some bills as early as June if Congress does not raise the debt ceiling.
The yeas are 217, the nays are 215, the bill is passed.
A bill passed by House Republicans last week to raise the debt limit includes steep spending cuts, which the Democratic-controlled Senate said they will not approve.
The full faith and credit of the United States cannot be held hostage. For months, we asked Speaker McCarthy and Republicans to present a plan, a real plan, to avoid default with no brinksmanship, no hostage-taking. But instead of presenting a viable plan, last week, Speaker McCarthy and House Republicans passed the Default on America Act, a hard-right ransom note to the American people.
The White House has insisted on a ceiling increase with no strings attached. Biden has said he will only negotiate on budget cuts after a new limit is set.
The most important thing we have to do in that regard is to make sure the threat by the Speaker of the House to default on the national debt is off the table.
Washington regularly sets a limit on federal borrowing, but also periodically lifts that limit to pay for spending Congress has already authorized.
For over 200 years, America has never, ever failed to pay its debt. To put in the capital and colloquial terms, America is not a deadbeat nation.
Treasury Secretary Janet Yellen and other policy experts have called on Washington to remove the limit, saying it amounts to a bureaucratic stamp on decisions already made.
As you know,
Yellen has warned that a June debt default would, quote, trigger an economic and financial catastrophe. However, the debt ceiling is supported by both Democrats and Republicans, and both parties have used it as leverage when their party doesn't control the White House. In 2011, House Republicans successfully used the debt ceiling to extract discretionary spending limits from Democratic President Barack Obama. The showdown took the country to the brink of default and led to a downgrade of the country's top-notch credit rating.
Just days after Disney sued Florida Governor Ron DeSantis in federal court, accusing the governor and his supporters of retaliation for opposing the state's Don't Say Gay bill, a district board appointed by DeSantis will now countersue.
Since Disney sued us, yes, we didn't sue Disney. Disney sued us. We have no choice now but to respond.
Martin Garcia is the chairman of the Central Florida Tourism Oversight Board.
This is why we called today's meeting, to authorize legal action in response to Disney's federal lawsuit. This district will seek justice in state court here in Central Florida, where both it and Disney reside and do business.
The decision, announced Monday, further escalates tensions between the entertainment giant and the state of Florida.
Disney say yay, we won't go away.
The skirmish began last year, after Disney criticized a Florida measure banning classroom discussion of sexuality and gender identity with younger children. Florida lawmakers responded by passing legislation that ended Disney's virtual autonomy in Central Florida, with the Disney World theme parks attract millions of visitors each year. In the lawsuit, Disney accused DeSantis and his supporters of illegally using the state government to punish the company for voicing an opinion that should be protected by free speech rights, saying, quote, the government action was patently retaliatory, patently anti-business, and patently unconstitutional.
No corporation is above the law and the people of this state.
DeSantis, a Republican who is expected to soon declare that he will run for U.S. president, at a press conference Monday said Disney is not entitled to special treatment.
It is wrong for one corporation to basically corrupt the local government, run it as their own fiefdom, be exempt from laws, have all kind of benefits that nobody else has.
You know, in the history of American politics, there have been many efforts to punish corporations and individuals for things they have said that trouble whoever is in charge. It has seldom been done so inartfully and so obviously as in this case.
Ken Paulson is a First Amendment expert at Middle Tennessee State University.
Typically, there is payback, and it's subtle and it's behind the scenes, and the people who are being retaliated against know it's happening, but there's no way to document the that's a real motive. In this case, Governor DeSantis has made this a campaign theme. It's in his autobiography. He's tried to raise funds around it. It could not be more obvious that when the Disney CEO questioned the Don't Say Gay law, it was time to open up the ammunition on Disney.
But as the battle has intensified, it has brought mounting political risks for DeSantis. Republican rivals like former President Donald Trump slammed the governor's stance, saying on social media that he is being destroyed by Disney.
The U.S. recommitted to a security pact with the Philippines on Monday as concerns grow about China's influence in the Pacific. Both President Joe Biden and leader Ferdinand Marcos Jr. alluded to pressure from Beijing in a White House visit. The trip marks a sharp turnaround after a decade of icier relations with Manila.
The United States also remains ironclad in our commitment to the defense of the Philippines, including the South China Sea.
A joint statement said new guidelines for stronger military ties meant any attack on Philippines' armed forces or public vessels would trigger American defense commitments under a 1951 treaty.
It is only natural that for the Philippines to look to its sole treaty partner.
Since taking office last year, Marcos has warmed up to Washington, in contrast to his Beijing-friendly predecessor, Rodrigo Duterte. Public opinion in the Philippines has turned against China too, over the harassing of Philippine ships and fishermen in parts of the South China Sea, both countries claim. U.S. officials say on top of the new guidelines, Washington will also send 3 military transport planes and possibly more patrol ships. The U.S. sees the Philippines as key to any effort to counter a Chinese invasion of Taiwan, the self-ruled island that Beijing claims as its own territory. If the People's Liberation Army does launch an amphibious assault on Taiwan, experts say the Philippines would be a potential location for the U.S. to base rockets, missiles, and artillery systems that would repel the Chinese invasion force. Earlier this month, the U.S. gained military access to 4 new sites on the Philippines, 3 of them that faced north towards Taiwan. While the exact shape of a U.S.-Philippine alliance in a wartime scenario remain unclear, Marcos has told reporters before he does not want the Philippines to become a staging post for military action. Separately, President Biden also announced he would bolster economic ties, sending a mission to Manila to advance trade and investment in clean energy, critical minerals, and food security.
Fires raged on city streets across France during May Day rallies Monday as black-clad anarchists clashed with police during union-led protests against French President Emmanuel Macron's controversial pension reform. In some areas, demonstrators pelted French police with Molotov cocktails and fireworks. Then, police were booed as they responded with tear gas. In Lyon, riot police were seen retreating on a bridge as projectiles were thrown. In another location, they were seen charging forward. Anarchists also clashed with riot police in the city of Nantes in front of regional offices and local administration buildings, some of which were burned. About 200 people were arrested, officials say, as hundreds of thousands of people took to the streets in protest. After Macron last month raised the retirement age by 2 years to 64, despite widespread and multi-sector strikes. The reform, which Macron says is necessary to protect the health of the pension budget, will be implemented gradually starting on September 1st. But protesters like Clara Bossard say Macron overstepped.
I
think that democratically, these pension reforms don't represent us. We elected people who were supposed to listen to us, and we realized that we're not really being listened to because there were a lot of us on the streets, and these were reforms adopted by force. And I think this is unjust.
Trade unions had called for a big May Day turnout as they attempt to force a U-turn by Macron's government, which forced its pension law through without a final vote in the National Assembly. Opinion polls show a substantial majority of French people oppose the higher retirement age, and many workers say an out-of-touch Macron is indifferent to their daily hardships.